Hey, how's everybody's pandemic going? Staying healthy, hopefully? Staying inside? I got COVID a few weeks ago, and that gave me plenty of time to do nothing but lay in bed and play video games. One video game that I kind of particularly got interested in throughout my time being deathly ill was the kind of gritty dungeon crawler called Darkest Dungeon. If you're familiar with the game, there's a lot of really cool aspects of it, a lot of stuff I really liked. But I think my favorite thing about it was the stress mechanic. In the game, if you don't know, you take a party of 4 into a variety of different dungeons, and they can get stressed out. Now, monsters and traps and just environments in general can make that stress worse or sometimes better. But it's a really interesting mechanic, and that's what I want to talk about today. I love D&D. I love D&D 5e. It's what I was introduced to a few years back when I started playing. But ever since I've been in it, I've kind of thought that the long rest cures all kind of plays more of a gimmick. I mean, I'm not a game designer. I don't know a better way to do it. But it kind of is a little bit gimmicky, right? Like, I got stabbed with a spear. Let me just go sleep it off. It works, and I don't think we should change that, or at least I shouldn't change that. But what if we added something to the game that could make the long rest kind of feel a little bit less OP and add a really interesting dynamic for the characters in-game? I'd like to introduce stress into D&D 5e as a homebrew thing. Now, you're more than welcome to take this and use it in your own games, or just use it in a one-shot to see how you like it. I personally have yet to use this. I plan on using it hopefully sometime soon, but I don't know. I just think it'd be really cool. So if you want to take it, play around with it a little bit, and comment below and let me know if, hey, this worked out and this kind of didn't. Maybe I'll tweak it and make a post about it or something. Maybe another video if I get enough feedback. But essentially what I'm going to be doing is taking the Darkest Dungeon stress and just kind of right into D&D 5e. So essentially, let's do this. Let's break it down into a few steps. One, you may be going, okay, so how does stress work in game? Stress kind of functions. I can speak. Stress kind of functions like a backwards hit point meter, right? So in D&D, let's say you got a character that's got 100 hit points. He takes 7 points of damage. Now he's at 93. He's got to keep track of that, right? And a variety of things can give that to him. Traps. Environment, like thorny vines and stuff like that, but more often than not, monsters. With stress, it's kind of different, because you want to be at 0 stress, which means you're in the right state of mind. As you go up in stress, you end up performing maybe a little bit worse. So you can have a total of 200 stress at any time, right? That number never goes up, it never goes down. At level 1, you have a max of 200 stress. At level 20, you have a max of 200 stress. When you hit 100, that's a threshold. When you hit 200, that's your second threshold. Let's get into those thresholds. Those are the kind of functions that I wanted this kind of stress to have. Now I'll kind of want to get into maybe more of the specifics. If you have 0 stress all the way up to 99 stress, you're doing normal, your character acts normal, there's no side effects, you are getting more stressed out. Provides a really interesting idea for roleplay. I would not suggest role-playing a character at 0 stress and a character at 99 stress the same way. It can add a little bit more believability to the stress if, as that builds up, you kind of, maybe your character breathes a little heavier, maybe he's a little bit more cautious, maybe he just doesn't want to be there anymore. It's a physical thing that's happening to you, much like hit points. Hit points are a physical thing that's happening to you. If you're at 1 hit point, you're probably not just going to run into the next room of the dungeon without scoping it out first. So yeah, role play that up. When you hit 100 hit points, you have a chance to become either afflicted or virtuous. Again, if you play Darkest Dungeon, this is all going to sound very familiar to you. I've just kind of ported it from that game into D&D 5e. At 200 stress, You get what's called a heart attack. I don't know if you've heard of them. They're strictly a fantasy game thing, you know, having a heart attack. You have a heart attack, and essentially you fall unconscious, and you start making death saving throws. Your hit points go to 0, just like that. You don't outright die. You get the death saving throws, but you become unconscious. You're too much stress, you can't handle it anymore, and you go. When you hit the threshold of 100 stress, you either hit it exactly or you go over it. The player rolls a percentage die. If the number rolled is equal to or less than twice that player's level, you become virtuous. Otherwise, you become afflicted. And you can look at the tables for those right here. If your character becomes afflicted, they must be reduced to 0 stress before the affliction wears off. If your character becomes virtuous, they must reach 100 stress again before the virtue wears off. All afflictions and virtues wear off at the end of a long rest. Your stress level, however, does not fully reset during a long rest. It'll go down depending on how much your DM wants. I would suggest to all the DMs out there not making it more than like 2d6 stress for a long rest. Different monster abilities, traps, environments, and even events can cause stress. These are ultimately up to the DM. I haven't gone through every monster and every potential forest and encounter in all of D&D and said this monster gives this much stress. But I will give you, DMs out there who wish to use this, some ideas of what can cause stress. What I would suggest may cause stress. I'm thinking probably like the Medusa's petrifying gaze would probably be a good idea. You get that first saving throw, and if you fail, you take some stress because you see yourself start to turn to stone. That's not great, not very good on the mind. I'd say a trapped room that releases a bunch of spiders or snakes, a la Indiana Jones. That's pretty stressful. It would freak a lot of people out. I had a game where I dropped a giant spider on one of my players who hates spiders. They killed it in like 2 swipes. They were like level 7 adventurers, but still very stressful. He roleplayed it really well. I really had a good time with it. I think he did too. But again, adding a little bit of stress in there probably wouldn't have been a bad idea. I'd say probably heroes wandering into a haunted forest at night. They see a few spooky specters and stuff like that. Some red eyes glaring at them through the darkness between the trees. That sort of thing can add a little bit of stress. I'd say probably not too much, as that's just kind of making players probably uneasy. Or not players, characters rather, uneasy. So maybe a little bit of stress, a d4 or 2, but not much. One thing that definitely would increase your stress by a fair bit would be dropping to 0 hit points. If you're on death's door, you're stressed out. So if you drop all the way to 0 hit points, you start making death saving throws. Before you fall unconscious, I would say take 2d10 stress, because that's a very stressful time. It also prevents players from just jumping back and forth between 1 hit point and 0. Like imagine a player just standing next to, like a wizard standing next to a paladin. The wizard gets hit with an enemy blow and the paladin just uses 1 lay of hands on him, picks him back up, he's at full health. Or not full health, but he's at full, like, functionality. Well, that's a little game breaking in my opinion. It makes it a little gamey, a little cheesy, and not very much role-playing. Imagine yourself just like passing out on a hospital table and the little beeper thing, beep, 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 and you just wake up barely. You're not going to be able to run around the room and do a marathon and move 30 feet per 6 seconds and all that shit. No, it's not going to happen. You're going to get stressed out. And another thing is, if you witness a fellow party member die, I don't know about witnessing a fellow party member drop to 0, because that can happen quite frequently in an adventure, but I definitely would suggest dying as a way to increase the rest of the party's stress. In that situation, I'd say that's purely up to the DM, whether he wants to add that or no. I'd say probably at least 2d10. for that, because that's a super stressful situation. Um, but I'm all about flexing the rules and the rule of cool. So if you decide that any of this at all is kind of not what you're looking for and you want to change it up a little bit, feel free, absolutely change it up. Just write me a comment and let me know what you did and if you liked it, because I enjoy reading that stuff. A good way to lose stress, though, and this is important, is because if you're going to be gaining all this stress, you're not just going to get to a finite point and say, okay, well, that's it, my player's dead because he couldn't handle stress and there was no way to get rid of it. You need a way to lose it. You need a good way to lose it. I'd say losing stress can easily be done through downtime activities, and there's a whole section, and I think the Dungeon Master's Guide, or maybe the Player's Handbook, no, I think it's the Dungeon Master's Guide, about downtime activities, what you can do and where you can go and all that sort of stuff. I'd say just use some of that, and if your players say, I'm stressed out, I just want to go gamble or go drink, or I'm a cleric, I'm going to go to the temple and pray for a few days and just kind of get a lot of this stuff off my mind, I'd say that's a great way to do it. Probably the best way for your players to get rid of that stress. And that really helps you as the DM, because you can use that downtime as introduction to plot hooks. If players are just going from point A to point B to point C to point D back and forth over and over again, and they're not the type that kind of explores and adventures out, it can be hard to work in some of your plot hooks, especially those that kind of detail a little bit more around the player's backstory. So I'd say use that downtime and have your party rogue gamble and cheat, and maybe he comes across a rival thieves guild that is maybe mentioned in his backstory. That could work. If he was just kind of running through town, grabbed a drink and a night at the inn and bounced, that never would have happened. So it can also be a great way to introduce plot hooks. Other ways to lose stress are virtue buffs. When you become virtuous, then you can lose stress just kind of as you go. The other way to do it is through a bard spell that I homebrewed. It's called Calming Melody. I'll put it here up on the screen for you. But essentially it's a way for the bard to just kind of, in the heat of battle, relieve some of that stress. It's not enough to really bring someone down from like a really high sort of stress level. So it's not going to break the game, I don't think, but it's enough to kind of help treat that stress. I kind of use it a little bit like a cure wounds? No. Healing word. I use it a little bit kind of like a healing word. And I think that it works pretty well. I think it's pretty well balanced. And now let's talk about the afflictions. So you hit 100 stress and you don't roll low enough to become virtuous, you become afflicted. At that point, you roll a d6. And I'm going to throw the table up here on the screen. You can see where that d6 is going. There's a few different ways, and I pulled all of these from Darkest Dungeon again, not gonna lie. The effects are different. Some of the effects in the game are obviously different than the effects in D&D, so I kind of pulled those and had to change them as much as I could. You can either become fearful, paranoid, selfish, abusive, hopeless, or irrational. A little bit of a wide spread. I'd say you can choose one as a player if it really lines up with your backstory. So let's say that you are a warlock who cannot be frightened. I forget what exactly that ability is, but there's an ability that allows the warlock to never become frightened. I don't think that they would become fearful. It just doesn't make sense. Near the DM, you can rule it how you want, but I would say that doesn't make a lot of sense in my game, so that probably wouldn't happen. If a player has a history of being a selfish person, the quintessential rogue, maybe every time that they become afflicted, they become selfish. Or, if the situation calls for it, Maybe they're in a terrifying place and they just become hopeless or paranoid. If you're afflicted, any friendly creature within 30 feet of you that can hear you. They have to be able to hear you. Because if you're either afflicted or virtuous, this works the same in reverse for virtues. I kind of see it as you're shouting something out. If you're hopeless, you're saying, what's the point? Let's give up and run away. We're all going to die. And that's going to stress out the rest of your party members. If you're virtuous, you say, steadfast, we've got this. Let's continue. And that can kind of ease the stress of the group. Roleplay that as you want. Any party member within 30 feet that can hear you if you're afflicted has to take 1d6 stress at the beginning of your turn. You roll that before you make an action, bonus action, movement, whatever. And everybody has to take it. If that makes somebody else afflicted, roll that then and there before you move on. As soon as someone hits that threshold, they roll to see if they're afflicted or virtuous. For virtue, in the game Darkest Dungeons, there's only 5 virtues that you can have. I needed 6, so I made one up. The 5 that I got from the game are stalwart, courageous, focused, powerful, and vigorous. The one I made up is tenacious. If you become stalwart, essentially you're going to be virtuous until you either meet a really big bad monster or you take a long rest, because you lose 2d6 stress per turn, which is probably more than you're going to take if you're in a decent sized party. If you're courageous, you just take less stress. So if you were going to get hit by a paralyzing ray, you're going to take 10 stress from that. You automatically bring that down to 7 stress because you round down. So it'd be 8 stress. Courageous also increases the amount of stress lost from your allies at the beginning of your turn. So much the same as affliction, at the beginning of your turn, you shout something courageous and we've got this, let's continue, let's push on. They can't stop us now. And you would usually just roll 1d6. Well, if you're courageous, you roll 2d6. That's how that kind of works out. And then party members within 30 feet of you that can hear you reduce their stress by 2d6. And that can be 2 1s, and that can trigger the abusive person in your table, or it can be 12. And everybody within 30 feet of you, if you're all tightly packed together, loses 12 stress. And that includes you, by the way. That's not just your allies. That includes you. The virtue and the affliction, those include you. That's not well worded, I know, but you also gain or lose that stress. Focused, I want to talk about focused for a second. You get advantage on attacks, and 19s and 20s become crits for you while you are virtuous. I believe there's a fighter class, I haven't played it yet, but I believe there's a fighter class that makes it so that a 19 is a crit for you. Just kind of automatically. If that's the case, I'd say bump that number down to 18 for the virtue. So an 18, 19, and 20 is a crit for you. If you're a level 20 of that type of fighter, and I believe that makes it so that an 18, 19, and 20 is a crit for you already, then a 17, 18, 19, and 20 become a crit. So just one lower than your normal crit also becomes a crit for you. And you have advantage on attacks. So, good job farming crits with that, essentially. If you get that one, just run to the front line with a greatsword and hack away. Vigorous, all enemies have disadvantage on attacks against you. That can be counteracted with pack tactics or something like that to make it just a normal roll, as normal advantage and disadvantage goes. And you also heal a d6 per turn. You just kind of, you're a healing boy. And you can roleplay that as you want. If you're a rogue who doesn't have any medical expertise, that's what I was looking for, you're healing because your blood's clotting, and so you're not losing as much blood per turn. Maybe that's a way you can roleplay it. It's up to you. Do what you want. And then Tenacious, the one that I made up, you gain 2 to your AC, much like Stalwart, but you're also immune to fear, and you cannot be forced to move. So the fear spell requires somebody to run away. A lot of there's a lot of different monsters that can grab you and throw you somewhere. doesn't work. You can't really be grappled. Well, no, you could be grappled, but you can't be moved. But that's kind of the meat and potatoes of it. A lot of this is kind of up to the DM to decide what monsters' abilities kind of give out stress and what don't. I'd suggest making the aberrations a very stress-heavy type of creature. Maybe humans and humanoids don't really give off that much stress. Maybe the orc chief's war cry could be stress-inducing. I wouldn't suggest very much. I'll say this: treat stress like vanilla extract and like cookies. Too much is just going to overwhelm the whole thing. So if you're going to add stress, I'm speaking to DMs, by the way, if you're going to add stress, the mechanic, to your game, make sure that the way that your players get it is in small amounts. Sure, if you're facing an adult red dragon, that's going to be super stressful. So maybe that's very high stress. But also, if you're facing an adult red dragon as a team of 4 level 20 characters, that's probably not going to be that stressful. So adjust to kind of the player level. Now, I'm putting a lot on the DMs here. I am. But I think it's going to make the game a lot more fun. So if you're a DM that loves roleplay, loves a little bit more gritty, and loves rolling dice, I'd suggest relaying this to your players. See what they think about it. And just kind of bring it up to them and say, hey, this is something I've thought about adding. How would you feel about it? If you're in the middle of a campaign, maybe it's not the best time to add that. I'd suggest probably at the beginning. But you know what? Bring it up to your players. Maybe they'd say, hey, absolutely. I was maybe thinking about quitting this game because it just wasn't that interesting, and I think this would really interest me. So it's kind of up to you. It's kind of up to what you want, what you decide, and what your players want. Thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate it. It's good to be back. I've missed a few weeks. I know. A few weeks, a few months. Well, what's the difference? I really didn't have any more ideas that I wanted to bring to the table, and I didn't want to make videos that I wasn't interested in making. So this really interested me, and I thought maybe it could interest some of you as well. How do I end my videos?